The chill of the October morning seeped through the thin glass of Imani Washington's apartment window, a constant, unwelcome guest. It wasn't just the cold from the outside that settled in her bones. It was the cold of scarcity, the cold of being alone. She sat at her small, wobbly kitchen table, a single piece of toast on a chipped plate before her. It was dry. There had been no butter for 3 days. She was tired. She was hungry. She was alone. The eviction notice was still taped to her front door, a stark white rectangle of fear. It was the third one. The landlord, a man with a perpetually sour face, had told her yesterday that there would not be a fourth. "Pay by Friday, or you're out," he had said, his words sharp and final. Friday was tomorrow. Imani looked at her bank account on her phone. $7.42. That was it. That was all that stood between her and the street. Her paychecks from her 2 jobs, one at a diner, one cleaning offices at night, were devoured by bills before they even had a chance to breathe. Rent, utilities, the minimum payment on her nursing school loans. It was a relentless cycle of earning and losing, a treadmill she couldn't get off. Her car, a 20-year-old sedan she'd inherited, had coughed its last breath 2 weeks ago. Now her commute was a 2-hour journey involving 2 buses and a half-mile walk, a journey she made before the sun rose and after it had long set. The soles of her sneakers were worn so thin she could feel the grit of the sidewalk through them. Every step was a reminder of how precarious her world was. Her gaze drifted to a framed photograph on the wall. It was of her grandmother, her Nana Rose, a woman whose smile could warm the coldest room, whose hands, though wrinkled, were the strongest Imani had ever known. Nana Rose had raised her, had filled her world with stories, with principles, with love. She had passed away 6 months ago, and the silence she left behind was a physical presence in the small apartment. "Kindness," Nana Rose used to say, her voice a gentle melody, "is the only currency that matters, Imani. You give it freely, and it will always come back to you. Maybe not from where you expect, but it will come back." Imani clutched the worn silver locket around her neck, a gift from her grandmother. Inside was a tiny, faded picture of the 2 of them, their heads pressed together, smiling. It was her anchor in the storm of her life. She tried to live by her grandmother's words, but it was hard. It was so hard when the world seemed to demand so much and give so little in return. Despite it all, she held on to one small ritual. In a little ceramic jar on her counter, the one with the hand-painted sunflowers, she kept what Nana Rose called the kindness fund. Every week, no matter how tight things were, she would put a single dollar bill inside. It was for a stranger, for someone who looked like they needed it more than she did. Right now, the jar held $5. $5 that could go toward a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, $5 that felt like a fortune. But the thought of using it for herself felt like a betrayal of her grandmother's memory, of the last piece of light she held on to. She finished her dry toast, drank a glass of water, and prepared for the day. She put on her worn-out uniform for the diner, the fabric thin and faded from 1,000 washes. She looked at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, a young black woman with tired eyes but a straight spine. Nana Rose had taught her to hold her head high, no matter what. Before leaving, she did something she had been dreading. She took the $5 from the sunflower jar and tucked it into her pocket. She wasn't going to spend it on herself. Today was little Maya's birthday at the youth shelter, where she volunteered on her one afternoon off. Maya loved chocolate cupcakes with pink frosting. Imani knew a bakery near the shelter that sold them for $1 each. She could buy 5. The thought of Maya's smile was the only thing that made the sacrifice feel worth it. It felt like a small act of defiance against the bleakness of her own life. The bus ride was long and crowded. People pressed in on all sides, their faces blank, lost in their own worlds of worry. Imani held the pole tightly, the $5 bill in her pocket feeling both heavy and insignificant. She thought about her nursing textbooks, about the dream of one day wearing scrubs not to clean a floor but to heal a patient. It felt like a dream belonging to someone else, someone with more luck, more opportunity. She got off the bus a few blocks from the shelter. The bakery was on the other side of a street lined with high-end boutiques and gourmet shops. It was a world away from her own. As she approached, she saw it. Vance's Fine Foods. It was a new grocery store, one she had only read about. The windows were gleaming, filled with pyramids of perfect, gleaming fruit and artisanal cheeses. It was a temple of abundance. Imani hesitated. She just needed to cross the street to get to the simple bakery. But a sign in the window of Vance's caught her eye. Grand opening special, artisan cupcakes, buy one, get one free. Her heart gave a small leap. If their cupcakes were $1, she could get 10 for her $5. 10 cupcakes. Enough for Maya and all her friends at the shelter. The thought propelled her forward. She smoothed down her uniform, suddenly self-conscious. She felt out of place, a dandelion in a rose garden. But the image of 10 smiling children was stronger than her insecurity. She pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped inside. The air inside was cool and smelled of fresh bread and something else, something rich and expensive. The floors were polished marble that reflected the bright, warm lights overhead. Shoppers with expensive coats pushed sleek, silent carts. It was quiet, reverent, like a library for food. Imani felt a pang of longing so sharp it almost took her breath away. This was how other people lived. She walked slowly, her worn sneakers squeaking faintly on the pristine floor. She located the bakery section, a beautiful display of cakes and pastries under glass. And there they were. Perfect chocolate cupcakes with swirls of pink frosting, each one looking like a miniature work of art. A small sign confirmed the price, $1 each. The grand opening special was real. A wave of relief washed over her. A small victory, a tiny pinprick of light. She was about to ask the baker for 10 of them when she heard a commotion near the front of the store. A man's voice, loud and angry, cut through the serene atmosphere. "What do you think you're doing, boy?" Imani turned. Near the canned goods aisle, a man in a tailored gray suit was gripping the arm of a young black teenager. The boy couldn't have been more than 15. He was thin, with a worn-out hoodie and terrified eyes. On the floor by his feet was a dented can of chicken noodle soup. I dropped it," the boy stammered, trying to pull his arm away. "I was putting it back." "Putting it back? Or stuffing it in your pocket?" the man sneered. He was tall, with a florid face and thinning gray hair. He radiated an aura of absolute, unquestionable authority. This was a man used to being obeyed. Imani's heart clenched. She saw the boy's fear, the way he flinched from the man's grip. She saw the other shoppers stopping to stare, their faces a mixture of curiosity and judgment. A woman next to her, dripping in gold jewelry, muttered just loud enough for Imani to hear. "It's always the same with them. No respect." Another shopper, a man in a polo shirt, shook his head. He should know better than to come in a place like this. The words were like tiny, sharp needles against Imani's skin. She knew that look. She knew that tone. It was the weary sigh of a bus driver when she paid in coins. It was the security guard following her too closely in a department store. It was a language of suspicion she had been forced to learn. The man in the suit tightened his grip on the boy's arm, making him wince. "Empty your pockets. Right now." "I don't have anything," the boy cried out, his voice cracking with panic. "I swear!" Imani looked from the boy's terrified face to the can of soup on the floor. Chicken noodle. The kind her grandmother used to make for her when she was sick. She looked at the $5 bill clutched in her hand. It was for the cupcakes. It was for Maya's birthday. It was her last $5. Nana Rose's voice echoed in her mind. Kindness is the only currency that matters. A well-dressed woman pushing a cart paused beside Imani. She leaned in conspiratorially. "I wouldn't get involved if I were you," she whispered, her eyes flicking toward the scene. "That's Arthur Vance. He owns the store. He has a nasty temper." The warning was meant to be helpful, but it felt like a dare. Don't get involved. Look away. Let it happen. It was the advice of a world that had taught her to be small, to be quiet, to not make waves. But Imani couldn't. She saw herself in that boy. She saw every moment she had been judged, dismissed, and made to feel less than. And she saw the tired, desperate hunger that might lead a person to even think about stealing a single can of soup. Her decision was made in a heartbeat. It wasn't a choice. It was a reflex. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and walked toward them. Her own fear was a knot in her stomach, but the resolve to act was stronger. "Excuse me," she said, her voice quiet but clear. It cut through the tension. Arthur Vance turned to her, his eyes narrowed, annoyed by the interruption. "What do you want?" he snapped. Imani ignored his tone. She looked at the can on the floor. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I'll pay for the soup." She held out her hand. In her palm lay the $5 bill, her cupcake money, her last money. Arthur Vance looked from the money in her hand to her face, then to her faded diner uniform. A slow, contemptuous smile spread across his lips. It was a smile that stripped her bare, that judged her and found her wanting. "So you'll pay for it," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "And I suppose you're his accomplice? Is this your little scam? One of you distracts while the other steals?" Imani recoiled as if struck. "No, I don't know him. I just want to de-escalate the situation. It's a can of soup." "A can of soup that he was stealing from my store?" Arthur Vance boomed, his voice rising. More people were watching now, their phones emerging from pockets and purses. The small red lights of recording devices blinked in the periphery. Imani felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. She was now part of the spectacle. "I am offering to pay for it," she repeated, her voice trembling slightly. "Please just let the boy go." Arthur Vance let out a short, barking laugh. "Oh, I'm sure you'd like that. You people are all the same. You come into a respectable establishment and think the rules don't apply to you. You think you can just take what you want. You people." The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. They were aimed not just at her, but at the boy, at anyone who looked like them. It was a brand, a judgment, a condemnation. Imani flinched. The crowd murmured. No one stepped forward. No one said a word in her defense. They just watched, filmed. "I'm not trying to take anything," Imani said, her voice now pleading. "Here." She stepped closer, extending the $5 bill toward him. "Just take it." With a sudden, violent motion, Arthur Vance slapped her hand away. The $5 bill fluttered to the polished marble floor. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. "Oh, I don't want your pathetic, dirty money," he roared, his face turning a blotchy red. "I want to make an example of you, of both of you. I'm tired of your kind infesting my store, my neighborhood." He pulled a pristine, expensive phone from his pocket. His thumb moved deftly across the screen. "I'm calling the police," he announced to the room. "I'm pressing charges, shoplifting for him, and for you," he pointed a trembling finger at Imani. "Conspiracy, accomplice to a crime." Imani stared at him, stunned. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. This couldn't be happening. It was a nightmare. All for a can of soup she had tried to pay for. All for a simple act of kindness. "Please," she whispered, the fight draining out of her. "I have to get to work. I'll lose my job." "You should have thought of that before you decided to harbor a criminal," he spat. He held the phone to his ear. "Yes, I need officers at Vance's Fine Foods immediately. I have 2 shoplifters in custody." He smiled cruelly at Imani. "Yes, they're black. Of course they are. Send 2 cars. They might be violent." The lie was so blatant, so malicious, it stole her breath. Violent? The boy was frozen in terror, and she was shaking so hard she could barely stand. She looked around at the faces in the crowd, a sea of silent, staring eyes. She searched for a flicker of empathy, of support, of decency. She found none. They were just watching the show. Humiliation washed over her in a suffocating wave. She felt small, powerless, and utterly alone. Her grandmother's words about kindness felt like a cruel joke. She had tried to do the right thing, and it had led her here, to this public crucifixion. She was going to be arrested. She would lose her jobs. She would be evicted. Her life, already hanging by a thread, was about to be cut. Arthur Vance stood over her, triumphant. He had won. He had asserted his power, and she was the collateral damage. He crossed his arms, tapping his foot impatiently, waiting for the law to arrive and validate his prejudice. The boy, Leo, started to cry, silent tears tracking paths through the grime on his cheeks. Imani's own eyes burned. She bent down, her movements stiff and robotic, and picked up the $5 bill from the floor. She clutched it in her fist. It was a crumpled, useless piece of paper, a symbol of her folly. The wail of sirens grew louder, closer. The sound was a death knell for her hopes, for her future. The crowd shifted, making way. 2 police officers entered the store, their expressions stern and businesslike. One was a young white officer with a buzz cut. The other was an older black man, his face lined with experience, his name tag reading Sergeant Miller. "What's the situation here?" the young officer asked, his hand resting near his sidearm. Arthur Vance immediately took charge, his voice booming with self-importance. "Thank you for arriving so promptly, officers. I am Arthur Vance, the owner of this establishment. I've caught these 2 red-handed. This one," he gestured to the boy, "was trying to steal a can of soup. And she," he pointed at Imani, "is his accomplice. Tried to cause a scene to cover for him." Sergeant Miller's eyes swept over the scene. He looked at Arthur Vance's flushed face. He looked at the dented can of soup on the floor. He looked at the terrified, weeping boy. And then his eyes rested on Imani. He saw her worn diner uniform, her trembling hands, and the profound despair in her eyes. He saw something that didn't fit with Arthur Vance's bombastic story. "All right, let's just calm everyone down," Sergeant Miller said, his voice a low, steady rumble that commanded attention without shouting. He turned to his partner. "Why don't you get Mr. Vance's official statement?" Then he knelt, so he was at eye level with the boy. "What's your name, son?" The boy flinched, looking at Arthur Vance with pure terror. "Don't you talk to him!" Vance barked. "He's a criminal!" Sergeant Miller held up a hand, not taking his eyes off the boy. "Sir, I need to conduct my investigation. Please allow me to do my job." He spoke with a quiet authority that brooked no argument. Vance sputtered, but fell silent. "It's okay," Sergeant Miller said gently to the boy. "Just tell me your name." "Leo," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible. "Leo," the sergeant repeated. "Okay, Leo. And what's your last name?" Leo hesitated. He wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve. He glanced at Arthur Vance, who was now puffing up his chest to give his statement to the other officer. The boy seemed to shrink in on himself. "Son, I need your last name," Sergeant Miller prompted again, his voice patient. A tear rolled down Leo's cheek. He took a shaky breath and whispered the name that would shatter the world of everyone in that store. "Vance," he said. "My name is Leo Vance." Sergeant Miller's expression didn't change, but a flicker of understanding entered his eyes. He looked from the boy to the self-important man across the aisle. "Vance," he confirmed. "Is your father, by any chance, Arthur Vance?" Leo nodded miserably, not looking up from the floor. A hush fell over the immediate area. The other officer stopped writing. He looked at his partner, then at the owner. Arthur Vance, hearing his name, turned from his self-aggrandizing statement. "What's going on?" he demanded. "Why are you talking to him? Just cuff him and get him out of my store." Sergeant Miller stood up slowly. He walked over to Arthur Vance, his movements deliberate. "Sir," he said, his voice neutral, "this young man is claiming to be your son, Leo Vance." Arthur Vance stared at him for a second, a look of utter confusion on his face. Then he glanced at Leo, truly looking at him for the first time. Not as a type or a kind, but as an individual. The confusion on his face curdled into disgust and rage. "My son?" he bellowed, a vein throbbing in his temple. "That's preposterous. That's insane. I don't have a son, and if I did, he certainly wouldn't look like that." The racism was no longer veiled. It was raw, naked, and ugly. Imani felt sick. The boy, Leo, flinched as if he'd been physically struck by the words. He curled into himself, a profound, soul-deep agony on his young face. He had not just been accused of a crime. He had been disowned, denied, and debased by his own father. "He's lying to you, officer," Vance yelled, his voice echoing in the cavernous store. "It's a trick, a desperate lie to get out of trouble. Arrest him! Arrest them both!" Imani watched the scene unfold, her own problems momentarily forgotten, replaced by a deep, aching pity for the boy. What must it feel like to be so thoroughly rejected by your own parent? Sergeant Miller remained calm. "Sir, we'll get to the bottom of it. Do you have identification, son?" he asked Leo. Leo nodded, fumbling in the back pocket of his jeans. He pulled out a worn wallet and produced a student ID card. Sergeant Miller took it and examined it. The picture showed the same scared face. The name was clearly printed, Leo Vance. "The address on here matches this store's corporate filing, Mr. Vance," Sergeant Miller said, his voice hardening slightly. "And the birth date makes him 15. Now I'm going to ask you again, sir. Is this your son?" "No, it's fake. It's all a lie." Arthur Vance was becoming unhinged, his face a mask of fury and denial. He was trapped in a lie of his own making, and he was trying to claw his way out with pure bluster. It was at that exact moment that the heavy glass doors of Vance's Fine Foods swung open again. This time, however, they weren't pushed by a casual shopper. They were held open by a uniformed driver. A woman stepped out of a sleek black town car that had pulled up silently to the curb. She was tall and elegant, a black woman exuding an aura of power and grace that instantly commanded the attention of the entire store. She wore a perfectly tailored business suit, and her eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the scene with a cold, analytical precision. The murmuring of the crowd died instantly. She walked directly toward the unfolding drama, her heels clicking with sharp authority on the marble floor. Her gaze locked onto the weeping boy. "Leo," she said, her voice a mixture of steel and concern. "Are you all right?" Leo looked up, and for the first time, a flicker of hope appeared on his face. "Mom," he choked out. The woman, his mother, knelt and put a protective arm around her son. She looked at Sergeant Miller. "I'm Eleanor Vance," she said. "I'm his mother. I got a panicked text message. What on earth is going on here?" Arthur Vance froze. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. He looked at the powerful, composed woman before him, as if he were seeing a ghost. "Eleanor," he stammered. His voice, once a confident boom, was now a weak, reedy whisper. What are you doing here?" Eleanor Vance stood up, her eyes narrowing as she took in the full scene. Her ex-husband, red-faced and sputtering, her son in tears, and Imani, standing by like a deer in the headlights, clutching a crumpled $5 bill. "What am I doing here, Arthur?" she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "My son called me, terrified, saying his own father was trying to have him arrested for shoplifting." Her gaze fell to the dented can of soup on the floor. For a can of soup. The pieces clicked into place for everyone watching. The crowd, which had been a silent jury convicting Imani and Leo, now let out a collective, audible gasp. The phones that had been recording the humiliation of a thief were now capturing the spectacular implosion of a powerful man. "It's a misunderstanding," Arthur croaked, sweat beading on his forehead. I didn't recognize him. He's gotten so tall." The excuse was so feeble, so transparently false, that it was pathetic. "You didn't recognize him?" Eleanor's voice was laced with ice. "You didn't recognize your own son? The son you haven't bothered to see in 6 months despite my pleas? Or did you just see what you wanted to see, Arthur? A stereotype to fit your ugly, prejudiced worldview?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing his arrogance, his authority, his entire sense of self. Arthur Vance began to shake. His knees looked weak, as if they might buckle. He looked around wildly at the police officers, at the crowd, at Imani, as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. There was nowhere to run. "And who is this young woman?" Eleanor asked, her sharp gaze turning to Imani. Imani found her voice, though it trembled. "My name is Imani Washington. I saw him grab your son. I just tried to pay for the soup." Eleanor's eyes softened for a fraction of a second as she looked at Imani. She saw the diner uniform, the exhaustion, and the fundamental decency that had led her to intervene. Then her eyes turned back to Arthur, and they were like chips of flint. "So let me get this straight," Eleanor said, her voice a low, controlled fury. "You publicly accused and humiliated your own son, refused to believe he was your son even when presented with evidence, and when this young woman, this stranger, showed more compassion and decency than you have in your entire body by offering to pay, you accused her of being a criminal accomplice and called the police on them both." Arthur couldn't speak. He just stood there, opening and closing his mouth like a fish, making small, strangled sounds. His public authority had evaporated. He was just a man, small and ugly and exposed. Eleanor Vance turned to Sergeant Miller. "Officer, I am Eleanor Vance. While this man," she gestured dismissively at Arthur, "manages the day-to-day operations of this single store, I am the majority shareholder and CEO of the parent company, Vance Holdings, which owns this entire chain. According to the bylaws of our corporation and the morals clause in my ex-husband's management contract, I have the authority to act in situations that bring disrepute upon the company's name." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the silent store. "Arthur Vance," she said, her voice ringing with finality, "you are fired, effective immediately. Your racist, vile behavior has not only traumatized our son, but has created a spectacle of hate that this company will not tolerate. Security will be here in 5 minutes to escort you from the premises. You are to hand over your keys, your phone, and any other company property. Do not attempt to contact any employees. Do not set foot in any Vance property again." It was a public execution. Clean, swift, and brutal. Arthur Vance finally broke. "Eleanor, no, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "It was a mistake. I was stressed. The grand opening where you decided to celebrate by trying to send your own child to jail?" She cut him off coldly. "Save it, Arthur. You are finished." He turned desperately to Sergeant Miller. "Officer, you can't let her do this." Sergeant Miller looked at him with an expression of profound disgust. "Sir, this is a corporate matter. It has nothing to do with me. However," he added, his voice hardening, "my investigation into your false report is just beginning." Eleanor then addressed the officer again. "I will not be pressing any charges against my son, of course. However, I would like to file a formal complaint against Mr. Vance for harassment, unlawful detainment of a minor, and the verbal assault of this young woman, Ms. Imani Washington." Imani stood, shocked into silence, as the entire world shifted on its axis. The power dynamic had not just flipped, it had been completely inverted. The man who had held all the power, who had humiliated her and threatened to ruin her life, was now the one being ruined, begging and pleading in front of the very crowd he had tried to impress. 2 burly security guards in dark suits arrived, as if on cue. They flanked Arthur Vance, who looked utterly defeated. His face was gray, his expensive suit rumpled. He was no longer a titan of industry. He was just a broken, prejudiced man. "Please, Eleanor," he whispered one last time as the guards took his arms. "Goodbye, Arthur," she said, without a flicker of emotion. She had already turned her attention back to her son. As the guards led the disgraced owner away, a strange thing happened. The silence of the crowd broke. It started with a single person clapping, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire store erupted in thunderous applause. They were clapping for Eleanor, for the swift and decisive justice. They were clapping for Leo, now safe in his mother's arms. And they were clapping for Imani, the quiet, dignified woman in the diner uniform who had started it all with a simple, costly act of kindness. Imani felt tears welling in her eyes again. But this time they were not tears of shame or fear. They were tears of overwhelming, shocking relief. The people who had been filming her humiliation were now smiling at her, giving her thumbs-ups. The woman who had warned her not to get involved now looked at her with awe. Eleanor Vance waited for the applause to die down. She guided Leo over to Imani. "Ms. Washington," she said, her voice now warm and filled with sincere gratitude. I don't have the words to thank you. You stood up for my son when his own father turned his back on him. You showed a courage and integrity that is truly rare." Imani just shook her head, clutching the crumpled bill in her hand. I just did what anyone should have done," she stammered. "No one deserves to be treated that way." Eleanor's eyes fell to the $5 bill in Imani's hand. "Was this the money you offered to pay with?" Imani nodded, embarrassed. "It's all I had. It was for... It doesn't matter." "It matters very much," Eleanor said softly. She looked at Imani's worn uniform, her tired eyes, and understood in an instant that this small bill represented a significant sacrifice. You, who have little, were willing to give it all for a stranger, while he, she glanced in the direction her ex-husband had been taken, who has everything, was willing to destroy a child's life over nothing. She placed a gentle hand on Imani's arm. "I am deeply in your debt. My assistant is on his way. He will take you and Leo somewhere to get a proper meal. We have much to discuss." Imani was too overwhelmed to argue. She simply nodded. She looked at Leo, who gave her a small, watery smile. "Thank you," he whispered. A few minutes later, a kind-faced man in a suit arrived and introduced himself as Eleanor's assistant. He led Imani and Leo out of the store, away from the staring eyes and the aftermath of the drama. As she stepped out into the fresh air, Imani felt like she was waking from a long, terrible dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was real. And she had a feeling her life was about to change forever. The assistant, whose name was David, drove them to a quiet, elegant restaurant. It was the kind of place Imani had only ever seen in movies. Leo was quiet during the ride, but he seemed to be slowly recovering from his ordeal, comforted by the presence of a safe adult. When they were seated in a plush booth, Eleanor Vance arrived, having finished her business at the store. "First," she said, looking directly at Imani, "I want to settle my debt to you." She slid a check across the table. Imani looked down at it. Her eyes widened. The check was made out to Imani Washington. The amount was $25,000. I can't accept this," Imani gasped, pushing it back. "This is too much. I didn't do it for money." "I know you didn't," Eleanor said gently, pushing it back toward her. "That's precisely why you deserve it. This is not a payment, Ms. Washington. This is a thank you. This is a restitution for the humiliation you were put through. Please, let me do this." Imani stared at the check. $25,000. It was a lifeline. It was rent for years. It was the end of her debt. It was a new car. It was food in the fridge. It was a future. Tears filled her eyes as she finally, slowly, pulled the check toward her. "But that," Eleanor continued, "is just the beginning. David did a little research on the way over. He told me you're a nursing student, struggling to pay your tuition. He told me you work 2 jobs and are facing eviction." Imani flushed, embarrassed that her life's struggles had been so easily laid bare. "John, don't be embarrassed," Eleanor said, seeming to read her mind. "Be proud. You have faced incredible hardship, yet you have not allowed it to harden your heart. That is the mark of a truly remarkable person." She leaned forward. "The Vance Foundation, our family's philanthropic arm, has a scholarship program for students in the medical field. I am the head of the board. As of this moment, you have been awarded a full 4-year scholarship to complete your nursing degree. All tuition, books, and fees will be covered." Imani's jaw dropped. She couldn't process the words. A full scholarship. The dream that had felt so distant, so impossible, was suddenly being handed to her. Furthermore, Eleanor went on, it is clear you have a gift for connecting with people and a strong moral compass. I am restructuring the Community Outreach Division of Vance Holdings. I want you to work for me. Not cleaning offices, Ms. Washington. I'm offering you a position as a community liaison. You would work with local shelters, food banks, and youth programs to ensure our company is a true partner to the neighborhoods we serve. The salary would be $52,000 a year, with full health benefits. You can work part-time while you finish your degree. Imani was speechless. She felt lightheaded. An hour ago, she had been facing arrest and homelessness over a $5 bill. Now she was being offered a new life, a career, a future beyond her wildest imaginings. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, Eleanor said with a warm smile. Yes, Imani breathed. Yes, thank you. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Eleanor's assistant, David, handled everything with quiet efficiency. He drove Imani to her apartment. He met the landlord and paid her rent not just for the month, but for the entire year. The eviction notice was torn from the door. While she was packing a small overnight bag, a delivery truck from a local furniture store arrived. New couch, new bed, new kitchen table. Another truck came, this one from Vance's Fine Foods. It was filled with bags of groceries, fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, bread, milk, butter. The cupboards and refrigerator, bare for so long, were filled to overflowing. There was even a box from the bakery. Inside were 24 chocolate cupcakes with pink frosting. David drove her to a car dealership and helped her pick out a safe, reliable new car, paid for by the company. The keys felt heavy and unreal in her hand. That night, Eleanor had arranged for Imani to stay in a comfortable hotel suite. After a long, hot shower, Imani sat on the edge of a king-sized bed, wearing a plush robe. She looked around the beautiful room. It was more than just a change of fortune. It was a validation. It was the world telling her finally that her grandmother had been right. Kindness was a currency, and it had come back to her 1,000-fold. Meanwhile, Arthur Vance's ruin was swift and total. The videos from the store, initially posted to mock Imani and Leo, went viral with a new context. News outlets picked up the story. CEO fires racist husband after he tries to have his own son arrested. Arthur became an overnight symbol of prejudice and entitlement. His name was Mud. His country club membership was revoked. His friends stopped returning his calls. The divorce settlement, which had been generous, was now subject to review due to the morals clause he had violated. He lost his job, his reputation, and his family in a single, self-inflicted blow. He was utterly, completely destroyed. 6 months later, the world was a different place for Imani Washington. She walked through the brightly lit halls of her nursing school with a confidence she had never known before. She was at the top of her class, able to focus completely on her studies without the crushing weight of financial anxiety. Her job as a community liaison for Vance Holdings was more fulfilling than she could have imagined. She had forged a partnership between the grocery chain and the very youth shelter where she used to volunteer. Every week, fresh, healthy food was delivered, free of charge. She had started a mentorship program, pairing employees with at-risk youth. Leo Vance was her first and most enthusiastic volunteer. He and Imani had formed a close bond, two survivors of the same ugly incident. The flagship store, Vance's Fine Foods, had undergone a transformation. At Imani's suggestion, Eleanor had renamed it the Community Table. A large part of its profits now went directly to funding local hunger initiatives. A large plaque was installed by the entrance, telling the story of the incident and dedicating the store to the principles of dignity, compassion, and inclusion. Imani had named the new mentorship program the Rose Initiative in honor of her grandmother. She often felt Nana Rose's presence with her, a warm and guiding light. She had used some of the money from Eleanor's check to create a small scholarship fund at the shelter, ensuring other kids had the resources they needed. One afternoon, Imani was in the campus bookstore, buying her textbooks for the new semester. The line was long. In front of her, a young student, a freshman by the look of him, was having trouble. His card was declined. Once, twice, 3 times. The color rose in his cheeks as he fumbled for another card, which was also declined. I'm sorry, he stammered to the cashier. I thought I had enough. I can put some back. Imani saw the familiar panic in his eyes, the sting of public shame. Without a second thought, she stepped forward. I've got it, she said quietly to the cashier, tapping her own card on the reader. The transaction went through instantly. The young man turned to her, his eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. Wow, you didn't have to do that. I can pay you back. Imani smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. You don't have to do that, she said. Just do me a favor. Anything, he said earnestly. One day, she said, her voice echoing the wisdom that had been passed down to her. When you see someone who needs a little help, just pay it forward. She wished him luck with his classes and walked away, leaving the student staring after her, a stack of books in his arms and a look of wonder on his face. Imani stepped out of the bookstore and into the bright afternoon sun. Her heart felt full. Her life had been transformed not by magic, but by a single choice. A choice to see a person, not a stereotype. A choice to offer help, not judgment. A choice to be kind. Have you ever judged someone before you knew their story? Have you ever walked away when you could have stepped forward? Imani Washington's story is a reminder that our assumptions can be prisons, both for ourselves and for others. It teaches us that integrity is not about what you do when people are watching, but what you do when you think no one is. Kindness costs nothing to give, but its value can be immeasurable. It can change a life. It can change the world. Now go be someone's hero.